Thank you for joining us today for Selling Optical Device Use to the Tough Customer. This is training video number 3 in a series of 3 web-based training sessions on optical device use. It is presented in collaboration with Lions Club's International Foundation, Kansas Lions, Kansas School for the Blind, and Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. My name is Chrissy Cowan. I am a mentor coordinator here at Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired and a TVI who has been working in the field for about 34 years.
My name is Cindy Bockover. I am a teacher in short-term programs here at TSBVI and was born with ROP, so have grown up with low vision and taught both in Nashville and here in Texas. Why are optical devices such a tough sell? This face of a grumpy boy is something that as TVIs we are all too familiar with when a student does not want to be using optical devices, is not interested in doing lessons. As TVIs, we can list the reasons why a student has no motivation to do this, has no enthusiasm for coming into the lessons. So in this presentation, we want to look at those factors of rejection and then strategies for being able to overcome the rejection that students so often exhibit.
As an overview of this presentation, we're going to be covering 3 major points. The first one are the multiple factors that we feel lead to rejection. Next, we're going to be discussing the hook that captures student buy-in to becoming a more willing device user. In order for this to happen, device training needs to be interesting. So finally, we'll be reviewing ways in which you can incorporate fun activities into both distance and near visual tasks through explicit or direct instruction.
We have listed 6 terms here and their definitions that this presentation does not focus on those specific skills, but we wanted you to be able to refer to those, and we will be using that terminology. So we wanted those to be familiar. We've also listed a number of training resources that Chrissy and I have found helpful in planning instruction for students.
So let's get started on those factors that lead to rejection.
The first factor of rejection is the student doesn't understand their eye condition. This very often is the student isn't even able to name their particular eye condition or use the terminology that is part of explaining that. It's important that the student understands how it impacts them and that they have the language to explain to others about their eye condition, and that being age appropriate. One of the strategies that we have found helpful is bringing in a 3-dimensional eye model where the student is actually able to feel the pieces, take apart the parts of the eye and then reassemble so that they have that sense of how does the eye work. A second strategy is bringing in the report from the low vision specialist so that you and the student can read this together and talk about the parts of that report. It means going over the eye condition, helping the student put it in language that is comfortable at their age level, talking about the clinical measures such as the acuity, near and distance acuity, usable field measure, bringing in suggestions for devices that the doctor has identified, and then also explaining those educational implications for the student. How is it that my low vision affects me in the classroom? And then a third strategy that we have is using a portfolio where the student and the teacher are building this together, the sections of the portfolio, and starting off with the student can understand from the table of contents, what are we doing in this portfolio that helps me better understand my eye condition and being able to explain it to others. And the table of contents is in the resources section that is available with this training series.
A second factor leading to the rejection of an optical device is the exclusion of the student from the decision-making process. Typically, the TVI suggests a visit to the low vision clinic. She works with the parents to get the student there, and they take the student, and there's little student intervention or interaction at that point. So it's a little wonder that the student rejects the devices from the very beginning. Instead, we propose that you include the student in that decision from the very beginning. And there are fun ways to do this. If you think in terms of visual access across a wide range of environments, all the while exploring properties of the different devices, the focus shifts from you've got to do this work to look at this. Isn't this fascinating? Science, art, cultural activities, and sports really lend themselves to this discovery process. You just need to insert an optical device in the process. You'll also want to pave the way for the student to be able to communicate during the clinical low vision exam. If students have experimented with devices beforehand, they have a better understanding of the outcome for this specialized visit and the reason for getting a device. They may also be able to express the devices they prefer for the ones they've explored. Once you have the prescribed optical device, another empowering act is to allow the student to choose the environments in which they are willing to initially experiment with a device. So often we're focused on access to the classroom environments when this may be the last place a student feels comfortable because of their concern for other kids seeing them. This is a picture of two students who've been given the opportunity to explore a variety of optical devices in a low vision clinic. What appeals to one student is not necessarily going to appeal to another. In these two pictures, students are seen selecting sunglasses to minimize glare, and another one is trying out different magnifiers. This is at a low vision clinic where they have a display of optical devices.
The age of the student is the next factor that we want to discuss. It is important that training not be seen as a one-size-fits-all approach. Being very aware of the student's age can help with helping training to be appealing. We recommend starting as early as 3 years old. At that very early age, when students become aware of the concepts of magnification, that bigger helps me to see it, then that's easier to add on to as the student ages. So getting started with things like pictures in books, where the student is able to look at those and appreciate them more with magnification. Using a telescope for seeing action on a TV screen, or looking at objects outside of the car window, watching people on the street. All of these can be of interest for even a 3-year-old, the very young students. And it is very, very important to be aware of what is the curiosity, where is the student's willingness to become involved in this, and what interests the student. And then as students become older, say for adolescence, shifting those activities during a lesson to things like figuring out the mall directory, looking at a bank statement, or studying the receipt at from a restaurant. So these match the student's age-appropriate activities. And then becoming aware of what the student does pick up on as much as what the student is not aware of, and helping the student to key in to those items. We have pictures here of, again, those age-appropriate activities, and whenever possible, bringing the students, one or more students together to be involved. On the left is a girl shopping, and clothing tags bring all kinds of interest for size, care instructions. On the right, we have boys who are studying a pair of shoes, of what's becoming that cool footwear. So finding the activities that match for all kinds of students. The next pictures are a student who is involved in making a bird feeder, and the instruction page she uses with a magnifier, and then is able to construct the bird feeder. And then the activity becomes being able to use her telescope to watch for the birds flocking to the bird feeder outside of her school window. So that was it's one of those examples of a very involved activity that captures the student's attention.
Another factor that leads to rejection is the appearance of the devices themselves. There are more devices than you can imagine, so it would be a good idea to explore some designs online with your student before they visit the low vision specialist. Also, some vendors offer devices at a great price, but you should be wary of plastic fittings and poor optical quality. This is a great opportunity to teach your student how to be a wise consumer. After you've looked online, shopping sessions for cosmetically appealing devices is very empowering. Some vendors will send you a catalog, so involve your student in sending off for these. Vendors are sometimes willing to visit with you and with your student, showing an array of their devices. If you have a low vision clinic with devices on display, this is a wonderful activity that either the TVI or the O&M specialist pursues with a student. Students will need to experiment with different devices, matching the device to the tasks that they have to do. I have here a sample of devices, and all of these have pros and cons related to the task that you're using them for. I wouldn't expect a student to use an electronic magnifier to read continuous text because the print is too large for efficient reading. Nor would I expect a student to use a 4X telescope in some outdoor mobility tasks. Here are some more near magnification devices. These are pretty typical about what you would see with any given student, depending on the etiology. There are, on this board, there are some stand magnifiers, which are very typical for the beginning device user. And then there are handheld magnifiers. Some of them are illuminated. And then there are pocket magnifiers that really fold up nicely. Older kids tend to really want to use these because they can put them in a purse or a pocket. These are some distance magnification devices. They're telescopes that are typically used by children and adults. Two of them are auto-focusing, so the user can focus them just with very simple movements. These other barrel telescopes are what you see a lot. Some of them have lanyards. I think all of them you can attach a lanyard. And they come in different powers with different fields of view. On the slide, you'll see more different kinds of devices. And in the corner there, you'll see a tablet. So now that we have tablets or iPads, kids are able to use those to take pictures of things, and they are turning out to be a nice distance magnification device as well. Electronic devices may have a wow factor, but we've found that the typical student forgets to charge them, so it's always wise to have a backup, non-electric device. You may have noticed the electronic tablet pictured in both groups of the devices. One huge exception to the non-electric device is the electronic tablet, most notably the iPad. There are apps for note-taking, recording, enlarging print, reading text, zooming in on distance targets, and capturing these for closer inspection. Books can be downloaded and the print manipulated seamlessly. The iPad is extremely attractive to the student with low vision and should be considered as an assistive technology that increases access.
Becoming comfortable using devices in front of others is a skill just as important as learning to focus. So the next factor of rejection we have is perceived and direct reactions from peers. We hear comments of the students saying that they feel different or they're aware of people looking at them as they use their device, and I'm the only one in the room using one of these, so it can become a very awkward, self-conscious situation for the student. Some of the strategies that we've identified that can be helpful is setting up role play situations where the student, you actually depict a scene where the student is putting into words, it's what kind of a response am I going to give here? This is very useful at multiple age levels. Also helping the student to distinguish between what is bullying and what is just curiosity from a peer about, hey, what's that thing you're using? Practicing responses that help to educate others. So in a very quick phrase saying, the telescope makes things bigger, so it's easier for me to see things. So finding the language that is comfortable for the student. It all comes down to developing that self-awareness that I'm comfortable with as an individual with low vision. Do I want to use this tool to become more independent? What are the times that I choose to rely on others? And then even the occasions where I know that I will miss information. So it's the student becoming comfortable in that situation. The next factor that we have is device use doesn't equalize things. Very often students will hear adults using the language, oh, you're going to love this device, it's going to do everything for you. And in reality, no, it doesn't. It is simply a tool that can be helpful in selective situations. So using realistic language with the student, beginning those conversations that help the students to recognize it's a tool that will have limitations. So again, the students have a choice in using this. Do I want to pick up the device and be independent? Do I want to rely on others? Or am I choosing to miss information? Or even using a skill like listening. All of these are some of the methods that a student can choose from. Helping the student be aware of the value of accessing environments that are detail-rich, that expands their experience, that gives them a more enriching sense of what the students around them are seeing. And they're able to participate in what's catching the eye of their peers, like a funny t-shirt, or the action on a football field, or a street performer. It's all of these things that people with typical vision participate in, and the device gives you access to that. The final factor that we've identified is that the student doesn't get the benefit of the device. In very straight language, if you've never seen it, you don't know that it's there. So helping the student to become aware of what they kind of have a sense of the details that they're picking up on, and then the things that they are very, very much missing items in the environment. The students don't automatically, because they know how to use a tool, aren't able to generalize to other activities or environments. Oh, look, my device would be helpful here. So it's that instruction that helps the student understand when the device is useful. We spend a lot of time with students on where is our devices helpful in the school setting, but getting beyond the school setting can be far more interesting to the student, and working that into conversation, bringing those examples up, asking about how did you use your device over the weekend, and then having the conversation about the students with the frustrations and the limitations of the device. Does the student recognize the times when a device won't be helpful? So those are all part of that. I get when the device can be a benefit. We have pictured here students on a bus, and a bus environment can be very challenging. If you notice the glare from the window and harsh lighting outside, there's movement, and by using it on a bus, you have a very public setting for others watching you. But we have here a student who is very motivated to look outside that bus window, and she could be looking at the sign on the sidewalk or checking out the cute guy on the sidewalk. Either way, it's a motivating situation.
We've been talking about the factors that lead to the rejection of optical devices. The last factor relates to the training issues. Often students are handed a device and shown how to focus and left to figure out the rest. There are many ways in which poor training can lead to rejection. There are 4 issues related to training that we've identified. The first is inadequate training on the skills needed to effectively use a device. The resources listed at the beginning of this presentation will help you with those skill sets. The second training issue is an unappealing or boring presentation of the device. We've talked about how to incorporate the device into the student's life. This approach will be more meaningful and interesting to the student than sticking within academic environments. In order for a student to really learn how to use a device, training needs to be consistent. So we recommend 30 to 60-minute training sessions weekly until the student is competent. This includes sessions off campus with either the TVI or the orientation and mobility specialist. Once the young student has learned how to use the device in a multitude of environments, the TVI should periodically check skill maintenance and make suggestions for visual tasks in new environments that are age appropriate. These photos show a young student and older student. Both are using a magnifier on something that interests them: eating and riding on a bus to the mall. Training requires explicit teaching in environments that are both academic and recreational.
So what are the hooks that motivate your student, that want them interested in the lessons? Just as we have pictured here, hooks come in all shapes and sizes, and we now want to move into those strategies. What are the methods we can use to hook our students and them getting motivated? In these photos, we have a student including them in the decision to get an optical device. The picture on the left has a student at a low vision specialist's office just before the exam, exploring devices, looking at the range of tools that are out there. And then the student on the right is a school setting where a range of devices are available for the student to try with some independent living materials, such as a restaurant menu, a receipt, a circular from a store. So these are, again, some of the materials that can be interesting to students depending on their age. Another training hook is capitalizing on the interest of your students. In these photos, we have a student who is using Magnification to look at a magazine that has really gotten his attention, and there are so many wonderful magazines out there with great pictures and good text reading. The photo on the right has a student in one of her most favorite activities being able to use one of those slick pocket magnifiers to see the text message on her cell phone, and she was just thrilled to find this.
Another way to hook your student is to use age-appropriate activities. Young students tend to love nature, and using a magnifier to pull in the details of a flower is an appropriate activity for the student on the left, whereas the older student on the right is very motivated by reading flyers announcing community activities posted on a kiosk in a university setting. Integrating your training into the home and community requires talking with the student and family about family activities. Once trained on the skills, the student should be encouraged to take the device home to use within the context of family activities. Parents, too, will need the guidelines on what is appropriate use. The next few slides give you examples of family activities. The student on the left is at a bowling alley, and the student on the right is using a magnifier in a grocery store. This family is on a boating trip, and the student has a telescope so that she can see outside the canoe onto the bank. The student on the left is cooking, and he reads the recipe on a packet. and the student on the right is reading a bus route map to be able to catch the bus to an activity.
Knowing what the fads are that interest your student is another training hook. Keeping up on these is one of those teacher tasks. In these next photos, we have a picture of some kids involved in action figure games where reading the instructions to participate in the activity is going to be very important. On the right is an example of an anime scene, and there's just wonderful detail in anime, so taking the telescope into that setting where you're using it to study the pictures on the movie screen is very important. Then meeting up with students, we've emphasized that, and anytime you can bring 2 or more students together. In these next photos, the top left example is a couple of boys studying the I3 model and getting a hold of one that really has some good detail. Studying the veins in the back of the eye always interests the students. The girls on the lower left are in a museum setting where they're actually using a near distance setting on the telescope to look at some historical photos, and doing that through a glass display case is developing that next level of skill. The students on the right are involved in a scavenger hunt at a grocery store where they're finding the price for that particular produce and having a great time of it. So we've been talking about the factors that lead to rejection and methods that we can use to motivate the students. It is especially important to remember that explicit instruction is necessary to help students become competent device users, and that explicit instruction means providing direct instruction in structured settings. So the next photos show on the top left a student participating in a sustained reading task where he's working to handle that continuous text. On the lower left is in an outdoor setting using the telescope to find birds or dogs or cars moving. There can be in different settings action that interests the student. And then on the right is a student working with a map and some charts, developing the skill, search strategies, and figuring out how to break down more complex material. So it is especially important to familiarize ourselves with the complexity of the settings and the visual demands for our students. That means going into every room in which the student has activities where they are participating and have educational expectations to work alongside their peers, and getting to know these settings. What are the challenges in that? So in this next picture, we have a typical 3rd grade classroom that has that incredibly dense, rich visual clutter going on. If you look at along the walls, the student is having to access this information. How is your student going to do that? Where being in that empty classroom and helping the student figure out the steps for doing this, where they can participate in the actual lesson. And then the next one, we all fondly remember the school cafeteria and the visual demands that can occur there. Harsh lighting, whether it's overhead fluorescent lighting or a bank of windows where the sun is coming in and glares off the waxed floors. There's food behind glass cases, a lot of chrome. There's movement and noise, and it's a vast space where the student is needing to figure out, I'm trying to find where my buddies are sitting. So working with a student in that empty cafeteria. And in the next photo is a high school algebra class where we all know the using whiteboards or projectors, LCD projectors, where the glare is coming off the screen and trying to figure out what angle do I need to be at to see the material. So working with the student in that very challenging environment. Our next one is a science lab. And often, because those rooms can be very large, there can be dim areas of the room or items that you need to have caution around them, glass beakers, things like that. So it's helping the student become familiar and identify when their devices can be useful in those settings. And finally, it's remembering that we are preparing our students for ultimately participating in adult responsibilities, having that independent adult life. And the next step for our students, one of those goals can be attending college. And this next picture shows, remember those auditorium-style classrooms in college where you may be more than 30 feet back from the board that the professor is using, and how are you going to manage seeing the notes for that? Typical distance vision tasks that occur for students during school are that reading notes from the board and copying the information. So practicing this, that the student becomes comfortable doing this depending on the teacher's speed. Gaining access to whether it's presentations, action in assemblies, demonstrations that are happening in the classroom. It's helping the students to identify that variety of targets that occurs in the school setting. When is it that their device is helpful? Then we have examples of field trips. In these photos on the left, the students are actually in the Texas State Capitol's Rotunda, which is a large space, very, very high dome they can look up to. Students really have enjoyed using their telescopes in that setting. And then the students on the right are in a fast food restaurant where they're having to look at that menu that is backlit and there's noise behind them. So helping the students develop the skill to manage that environment is important.
Direct instruction for near tasks is also critical for student success. Helping students to develop a comfort level and mastery with a range of materials and formats will require instruction. Typical near vision needs in the school setting include expanding access to more reading materials. The more that you read, the better you get at reading. Not much comes in large print once you get out of school. And building reading fluency. Many students with low vision are slow readers, but reading speed can and should be improved with methods to build fluency with a magnifier, with a goal set for reading regular print with magnification. Another near vision need is gaining access to complex formats, such as those you find in social studies, math, and science texts, particularly graphs and charts, maps, drawings, and diagrams. Near vision training transitions into adult life, so please remember to practice typical high-interest tasks beyond the school setting. Pictured here are examples of 2 near tasks in the school setting, exploring details on a field trip to a science museum and participating in a chemistry lab experiment. There are so many near tasks that will require magnification. Here we see just a few. Magnifiers are being used to look at credit card numbers, remote control numbers, dosage instructions on medicine bottles, and the fine print on a contract. Think of all the things we look at and read. Bring as many of those items and experiences into your instructional sessions, and you will expand the universe of your student.
So the big question becomes, consider what catches your visual attention. If we can identify these targets, then we can bring in lessons that help the student become successful. We have given reasons that we feel lead to a student rejecting devices, strategies that can be helpful in motivating the student to want to use devices more often, and finding the places that they want to explore, And it's by looking for these reasons that we come back to that question, why are optical devices a tough sell? And that we can help to change that. So we can go from getting to the grumpy kid to the motivated student who wants to use devices.
We hope you have learned ways to make your optical device training interesting and appealing to both you and your student. It's our sincere belief that optical device use is crucial for student success and full participation. When you are enthusiastic about optical devices, your student will catch your mood and be more open to fitting devices into their world. Thank you for joining us in this last of 3 training sessions on optical devices.